Yeah.
And then another was, I mean,
we're not
it
used to
ended
that.
first,
So that's why.
the second part, but it was so good. Like, I got a lot of fun there.
Oh yeah, she did that too.
Yeah, so yeah,
It's a good one.
yeah, because you're not gonna understand something if it was like some references or something maybe. Even I was like, but then I heard because the guy said, but then if you don't know, I imagine that you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But my favorite game from all time is
All right, we are going to begin. Awesome. So we have the people that we need here. This is exactly what I was looking forward to. All right. So thanks again for your time joining us at USGLeads. Again, my name is C.T. Nanu. And if you didn't catch the background information, I'm an academic librarian here at Pretty Library at the University's at Shady Grove. But before I get into any of the presentation stuff, I do have an activity. So if you look at one of your sides of the sheets as you walk in, again, this is, like I said, a workshop, but the workshop isn't me forcing you all to work. We are working together because I'm about community. So take time, 5 to 10 minutes. I know we've started a little bit late, so it might just be 5, but there are 2 questions, and they are as follows. Name at least 3 people and or organizations that you particularly think of when you hear the word leadership. So that's the first question. The second one is, when you think of the word branding, what images or feelings come to mind? And feel free to discuss as well amongst yourselves what that is. But like I said, we'll give it 5 minutes since we started a little bit late. And we'll come back at like 5:45. So again, if you need some time to think before you write, or if you just want to start chatting with each other, you are welcome to do that. And I'm actually going to jump in that conversation as well at some point. So either famous or not famous, that's a possibility when it comes to leadership in particular?
Yeah, but infamous. Like,
infamous, gotcha.
So, nah, it's not good. Nah. I mean, he was a good leader, but he did bad things. Yeah.
That's true. Any things that come to mind, again, use the paper. You don't have to use it, but that is there for you to support your experience here. It could be companies, nonprofit organizations, groups of people, like even some of the groups that are represented here at USGLeads for the evening. It could be literally anything or anyone or any idea for that matter. I'll give it about another minute or so. So if you've already written down your thoughts, then of course we're going to get into the sharing portion of our evening. Okay, if you have a lasting thought you want to write down, go ahead and do that, and then we'll do a open discussion. So, for the first question, name at least 3 people and or organizations that you think of when you hear the word leadership. So does anybody want to share some of those things that came to mind when it comes to leadership? Oh, and you don't have to, you know what, I forgot to say this. I used to teach in classrooms for many years, Montgomery County Public Schools, North Texas, and Northwest ISD, so I don't want this to feel like a class, because I know how that can be like, I'm sending information to you, you're receiving it, and you're just sitting still. I fall asleep very easily, so this is why I wanted to, again, be a workshop where we're all working together. So you want to just blurt it out or raise your hand and blurt it out at the same time, that's cool. But there's no like order per se.
Okay.
So if you want to go ahead and say it, go for it.
So I said, like, the president is kind of a leadership, like, not, like, in general,
Mhm.
because the president leads the country and stuff like that.
Perfect idea. Yep. President, and I saw your hand as well.
Yeah, I told you about why is the MLK like Martin Luther King Jr. So
Okay.
a leader that led the civil rights movement or like a participant.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Any other ideas that came to mind? Yes.
I actually said the Peace Corps, like for community leadership.
Absolutely. That's great too. And the front table.
I said Nintendo because they have been like so innovative in everything they do, and every time like they do something, they always like go up. They step up like the gaming industry, and I think that like I don't know, at least in my perspective, that's like a kind of leadership.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to pick your brain from one geek to another. So for people who aren't familiar with Nintendo, how many years has this organization, has this company been in existence to your knowledge?
More than
More than that.
30.
More than that.
40.
It started,
More than that.
it started as like a TV, like was it making TV or something, or being on news or something like that? No?
It's a really old company, over 100 years old.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they started making cards and also selling general products. Back in their day, you could have thought of them as like a Giant Food or Whole Foods or a Costco. They were just making numerous products, but they focused on the entertainment industry. But that's leadership, right? So, and sorry, I don't want to leave you hanging. So,
Sure. I don't know, like the European Union, because they have their representative from each country, so other leaders.
absolutely, absolutely. So those are all great answers and absolutely correct. So with regard to branding right here, and I put this on purpose with the word images, like images and feelings. So when you think of branding, what are some brands or what are some, again, images or feelings that come to mind that you may have written down or just popped in your head just now?
I thought of the Kardashians when I thought of Brandon.
Okay, and that's a great example. So the Kardashians, the family as a whole or just certain people in the family?
I think like the name sends it so.
The name.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, great example. Any other examples? Apple. Now the Apple computer or an Apple? Listen. So Apple computers for sure. Any other thoughts? Think about what you're wearing, for example. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually wrote that. I was like, ourselves, like advertising what the like companies
Absolutely.
stuff. So like, I'm wearing like specific brands, I guess.
Absolutely. No, so that's all accurate. So going on to the next slide, this is what we're going to be covering as a group, as a community. I just want to emphasize this is what this is about, community. So of course, we're going to be going over what is branding, what is leadership, and then how do you brand yourself for leadership. And I made that intentional yourself, because that's another thing, like you were saying earlier, when you're wearing these clothing, when you're wearing these items or using items, it's all connected to self at the end of the day. And then we're not going to go so detailed into social media and professional platforms, but I am going to use examples of men and women that you've probably seen and or heard of before that do a great job of branding and using their branding skills on social media and professional speaking. Even the gentleman that we met earlier, Tony with Make-A-Wish, he's a great example of that. He's a brand for or a brand ambassador for this organization. So going to the first question of what is branding and then what is leadership. So leadership, when you hear this word, again, some of you gave examples of politicians, some of you gave examples of people who are innovators, companies in general. But with leadership, and this is just a general question that anybody can answer at any point, what is it not? So when you hear the word leader or leadership, what does it not actually mean?
Follows.
Okay, so if someone is following, they're not necessarily leading. What else? And you can use examples from your own life, whether you're working full-time, part-time, or have had a gig or a job in the past, and you've had a boss or a supervisor or somebody that's above you, so to speak, by position or title. Did they or did they not display good leadership, or did they or did they not display bad leadership?
I think when you try to use your power to like belittle others, I think that's not leadership, regardless of like the position you have.
Absolutely, absolutely, I agree as well. Any other thoughts or ideas regarding leadership, what it is or what it is not? Okay. So there's, and I don't have it up on this slide, but there's an image that you've probably seen on social media where there's two, it's a square image, there's two halves, the bottom half and the top half. The top half has somebody like a stick figure, and they're on top of other people or like a chariot. They have a whip, and then they're kind of commanding people below them to move forward. And that is a not example, if you will, or an example of not being a leader. Right below that, same types of figures, stick figures, instead of the person above with the whip and the commanding body gesture, they are actually locking arms and moving forward with people. So that is a general display, a general understanding of leadership. Leadership isn't necessarily about, the title you have or a position you have or how much authority you have over people, though that is a part of it. Leadership is more so about how are you serving other people. So when it comes to leadership, the real definition of a leader is somebody who's a servant and serving while leading. If you think about the president or executive director of USG, if you think about any president, male or woman in any country, their job essentially is to serve the public, right? Their job is to make sure that services are being provided and being provided to the best of their ability and the ability of their team, their organization. So when it comes to leadership, you want to also equate that to service. Now, when it comes to branding, and we already talked about this a little bit more, but when it comes to branding, let's see if my mouse is clicking. Let me go back one. Actually, we'll just jump to it since we are behind. So when it comes to branding and leadership, there are two words I want you to think about right now in this very moment and also afterward once this USGLeads symposium is concluded. So exposure being the first one, and then influence being the second one. And if you're not exactly sure why I have these two words up, let me describe an example of exposure. So there is a story in the Bible where a particular young man has a very technicolor coat. If you know the story, then you've obviously heard of plays that have been done on that. But basically, he was apparently sold into slavery. But while he was in slavery, he did very well as a slave. And then he went from slavery to working in a high-ranking Egyptian leader's home and leading his household and also leading other people that Egyptian official led. He did so well at that, he almost had more authority and power, but unfortunately he had an issue with that person's wife. And he was incarcerated for that. So he was incarcerated for a period of time, but even while he was incarcerated, the jailer, the person who ran the entire jail, gave him all that responsibility to run the facility because he was that trustworthy. And then while he was incarcerated running the jail, he ran into two former officials in Egypt that also happened to be incarcerated, and they were having their own issues. But one would eventually get out and live. The other one would eventually get out but be executed and die. But the person who lived remembered, oh, this person helped me out while I was incarcerated. Years later, Pharaoh of Egypt called that person out of jail, incarceration, and basically answered a question or a dream that he had. And based on that experience that he shared with Pharaoh, he was actually second in command to Pharaoh. So the reason I bring up exposure, and this is just one story of many stories that we can pull up, not necessarily just from the Bible, but in real life. When it comes to exposure and leadership, people who get to positions of leadership are in the right place in the right time. And also they're there because they're prepared for it. This person, this character, Joseph, that existed, was prepared. He was developed, he was groomed, if you will, from a very young age. His father owned a lot of land, had a lot of property, had a lot of cattle. So you would assume, even at a young age, he understood how to run and maintain a business. But just because you have wealth, just because you have property, does not necessarily mean you know how to manage it well. But if you are disciplined, if you can prepare yourself and have that work ethic, when you're exposed to the right opportunity, to the right person even, that is an opportunity for you to eventually get into a position, into opportunities of leadership. Now, leadership is a form of influence. I do want to emphasize that. So when it comes to leadership and influence and branding and influence, and we're going to talk about branding a little bit, that's something you want to think about, like, what is it actually that you're trying to do when it comes to influence? There are other things that are connected to this word of influence. Money, for example. The more money, more problems. I'm sure you've heard that notorious quote from Notorious B.I.G. and other people. But, money is a form of influence. Power, and power can mean a lot of different things. That is another form of influence. But being in a position of leadership also is a form of influence. But when you have exposure to opportunities to become a leader, that leadership that you step into will now also add to you the opportunity to also garner or utilize or wield influence. So those are things, again, you want to think about when it comes to yourself, literally yourself, your brand, the type of servant leader that you want to be. So I have a few examples that I wanted to show you with regard to branding. And these examples, again, are people. So you'll see images of people. They may or may not be recognizable, but we'll talk a little bit about some of them. But due to the amount of time we have, we will unfortunately have a chance to jump to all of them. So again, we're addressing the branding aspect of leadership. Let's see if it shows. Here we go. Okay. So how many of you have heard of this young lady, Vera Wang? I know you immediately nodded and you did see. So the ladies, I'm assuming, I'm not going to stereotype, but all the ladies here know who this young lady is? That's okay. So could somebody inform, just in case the masses, who Vera Wang is?
She's just a designer.
Okay. Now, what is she most known for in the world of design?
Wedding dresses.
Yes, wedding dresses. So now I will sit down again, for those of you who don't know who she is, just like you said, and I'm sorry, what's your name?
Melissa.
Melissa, thank you for sharing that. So Vera Wang is a famous, internationally famous designer, but what she's known for mostly in the design world, again, is wedding dresses. Now, a little fact about her, some of you may or may not know this. She started her career later in life, not actually like right out of school. She did not hit her success until she was in her 40s. She doesn't look like she's 40 here, but she's actually well over 40 in this picture that's taken of her. But success when it comes to branding, success when it comes to leadership isn't necessarily like formulaic where, you know, if you do this for, I'll just use college as an example. So if you go to Montgomery College for 2 years and then you transfer to this state university and stay there for 2 years and then you go to a master's program and you're there for 2 to 3 years, right out of that graduate program you're going to be put in a position of leadership and you're going to, for the next 40 years, have this amazing experience in this industry. That's not how it works. Not anymore anyway. But her story is a great story to look into. Here's another example we'll check out. Again, you may or may not know some of these folk. Okay, so Damon John. By a show of hands, how many of you have at least either heard of him or seen his face? And I say seen for a reason. So, is it both for you, Melissa, or?
Seen and like heard about him.
Gotcha.
But briefly.
But briefly, okay. Can anybody who is, whether you're vaguely familiar or very familiar with Damon John, tell me why you've heard of him?
Because he was on Shark Tank.
Shark Tank. So
Yeah.
most people nowadays know him because of Shark Tank. But what is like his story? If anybody happens to have an idea of his story.
I want to say because I saw him in an episode of What Would You Do,
Mm-hmm.
and he pretended to be a poor guy in a
Yep, I saw that.
like expensive store. So I think he talked about like how he was poor at first, and then now he's like a millionaire.
Absolutely.
But I don't know.
No, you're absolutely right. So, and I intentionally put him next to Vera Wang. They're both originally fashion designers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both from the New York area, if I'm not mistaken. They both did not start out very well off, if you will, financially or as far as influence is concerned. But they had a vision, they had a goal, they had a dream, and they stuck to it, and stuck to it to the point of where when they had the right exposure, and his story is really cool when it comes to exposure if you ever want to look into it. But when they had the right exposure, more opportunities came, and with those opportunities and the decisions they made based off of those opportunities, they gained and gained more influence. Influence meaning money, like you just shared. Influence meaning connections as well. If you ever watch the show Shark Tank on ABC, they have literally a bunch of millionaires and billionaires. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a guy, and we're talking as well as about a gal who did not have any money whatsoever for the most part. That were at poverty, if not below poverty. But again, exposure, preparation, work ethic, all that made a difference. Now, I'm actually going to go a little bit more in depth with Mr. John, and you'll probably guess why in a little bit. But let's see. All right, so I mentioned that we're going to go over particular examples on social media. I'm not going to, again, go into super depth about that, but I want to show you some of his accounts. Actually, I was not expecting the top bar to be disappearing like that on screen. Okay, so this is his LinkedIn account, and as you can see, and I'm logged into my LinkedIn account, so anytime you talk about branding, anytime you talk about leadership, you're also sharing a story, a message, and you heard that earlier from Ada when she had done her wonderful presentation. So when it comes to what you are passionate about, when it comes to what you are personally interested in or have curiosity about, that should reflect in your brand. So actually, since we have you all here, I'm going to ask each of you just to blurt out your current interests like personal interests, and then also what you're studying here at USG. So if we could just kind of work away clockwise, starting with you, sir.
Personal interests, like hobbies or anything?
Yeah, anything like that.
I play volleyball.
Volleyball?
I play volleyball. I'm a communication major.
Okay.
My name is Sam.
Sam. Okay. So Sam, two things you shared about yourself to me: volleyball or sports, and then communications major. And then for those who are not familiar with communications here at USG, that's affiliated with the University of Maryland as well. So those are a lot of details in a very brief period, a brief sentence that you just shared. Thanks, sir. And then yourself?
My name is Jennifer. I'm also a communication major from College Park. My biggest passion is public speaking, and then one of the other things I'm very highly involved in is like mentorship.
Mentorship, and that's definitely an awesome thing too. So mentorship, public speaking, communications major. In just those few words that you shared, Jennifer, I know a lot more about you. And then, of course, I know your name, Melissa, but go ahead and share additional info.
I'm also a communications major, and from College Park, I like the whole like designing on Adobe and stuff like that, and also I like to dance for fun.
Cool. So Adobe Creative Cloud, I'm just going to generalize that, and then dance as well with communication. So again, with those few words, I know a lot more about you, and that's because of, again, the branding that's been done in those industries or fields. And then go ahead for you two.
Ricardo, psychology major here in UMBC. Want to do IO psychology. For fun, I play guitar and sometimes compose songs.
Music and guitar specifically. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And then last but not least.
My name is Christina. I'm a simulation and game design major at UV, and my passion and hobby are video games and making, playing them and making.
So video games, dance, music, volleyball, mentorship. These are all great fields. These are all great passions to have. And there's so much already that you can find online alone that deals with branding and that deals with leadership. So going to jump to from one platform to another, Twitter. Again, he has a consistency, and this is something you probably heard before when it comes to branding, but you'll see a lot of the same type of imagery. If I go back to his LinkedIn, he literally has the same image. So when it comes to your brand, whether it's online or offline, there's a type of image that you want to make or construct. For those of you that have, I know we've met a few times on campus, so you've seen how I dress. Like, I'm known to dress a certain way. I have a white pair of specs, I got these brown pairs, and I've got another pair that's like a translucent blue and red for whatever reason. But you know, I like fashion. I love art. I used to be an art teacher, so I try to show that brand of what I've understood about the arts industries, the education industries, etc., and how I dress, and also what I talk about when it comes to my passions. Going to his Instagram, same deal, same image. And then, of course, just like Ada was saying, when you go to the grid, you can tell a lot more about that person or that organization. In his case, like I said, he's from New York, so even though you see him in his business suit here, it's kind of hard to tell, but there's a Yankees hat. So he's very much about where he was originally from, his roots, and he likes to support that, but he likes to dress up as well, as we can clearly see, and have fun, which is also something we heard from another young lady. And then right here, Fubu, if you're not familiar with this story, Fubu is actually his brand. He is a co-creator and still president of Fubu, but Fubu is no longer just about clothing. They have various venues now. They actually have a mobile phone, for example, that they are, I think they've already launched. If not, they're going to be launching pretty soon in service. But there's a lot of different things he's done. Rise and Grind, for example, if you've not heard of his book, of the many books he has, is a really great book. I have all his books. And the reason why I have all his books is so, I'll show you another thing. All right. I needed to get them autographed. So I mentioned exposure. This was about 2, if not 3 years ago, November, so almost 3 years ago. So when I used to live in Texas, I used to work with a direct selling company, and I met a lot of people who are really great salespersons and also a lot of influential people. being in that industry at the time exposed me to a lot of different people, and this exposure led me to have connections like this where I could actually have a face-to-face conversation with Mr. John, have him sign my 3 books. You can't see the third one, but I had a print copy that I got for free from him. But before that, when it comes to exposure and influence, we had a conversation on social media. I was connecting with him first digitally before I ever met him in person. If you look at the dates, let's see, this is August 2015 right here. And like I said before, this is November. Sorry, that's another person that I met. There we go. The following year, so literally a year later, I went from Instagramming somebody to meeting them in person and having a really great conversation. But there are other pictures I want to show, and this is, I think you'll like this one. So, do you know this guy? If not, you definitely should. Yeah. So Nolan Bushnell, if you've never heard of him, you've probably heard of what he's done. Atari, has that anybody heard of that before? That's a company and a video game system. But Chuck E. Cheese. Everybody here should know about Chuck E. Cheese. But so I bring that up because he is the brains behind Chuck E. Cheese. He used his company, his initial company, because he sold it off, I believe, of Chuck E. Cheese to beta test games, arcade games, like the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. And once that beta testing was done in Chuck E. Cheese, he sold those games on consoles, and he was making money and making money and making money. So he's an entrepreneur in his own right, of course, but how he branded himself was just simply through fun things like Chuck E. Cheese, through video game consoles. And now he has well over like 8 or 9 companies. He's a multi-millionaire, as is his family. He has sons who also are in the video game and technology industries. But again, I bring all this up to get back to the point of what I said before, influence being one thing, but before that, exposure. So there's another person that you may have heard of. I think more people know about him than the first two. So Gary Vee. So if anybody that is not familiar with Gary Vee would like to know about him real quick, show my hands. Okay. So for those of you that didn't show your hands up, can you school the rest of us on who this gentleman is? Like a general summary, not necessarily his life story.
It's like I see him on social media. I don't follow him that much.
Mm-hmm.
I literally just overheard somebody having a conversation about him the other day. They were talking about like the way he talks. I know he just like, you know, he has a big platform and like, you know, I just hear him giving a lot of advice and talking. He talks about business and just different strategies and different ways to do things. So I would say like he's a big like leader of thought kind of person.
Absolutely. Now, does anybody want to guess what industry he started in? Because I already mentioned the first two people. They were both fashion, but he is not fashion, I can promise you that. But any guesses what industry he might have started in if he's such a big influencer, and he is, in the world?
Looks like tech.
Tech, okay. So any other guesses?
Maybe business.
Okay, but what kind of business do you think? It's okay. Any other guesses?
It's not grooming.
Definitely not grooming. Definitely not grooming, but he can afford it, that's for sure. So he actually started out in the wine industry. And it wasn't his business, it was his father's business. So if you can imagine, and I mentioned this earlier with a different story of Joseph and his dad and the land he had. So his father owned a winery, and he would sell wine beverages and other beverages in general that are alcoholic, and he would run the store. But he took his father's business and he basically like amped it up several times over, and they made a lot of money. And in his time of making all that money for his father's business, he was also going to these conferences, having these conversations with people, and just giving advice regarding his experiences in that specific sector of industry. But he got recorded, and those recordings got uploaded, and that's when his popularity on social media started picking up. So he picked up on that. This is before the whole influencer thing was a thing, right? He picked up on that, saw the value in that, and decided, hey, I'm going to still run this business of my dad's, but I'm also going to start this other business when it comes to giving advice. And that's, again, now a very popular thing, but literally 10, 15 years ago, if you were to turn back the hands of time, I promise you wouldn't see a lot of people doing what he's now doing. So that's how he got his name and fame, not because he is such a great advisor when it comes to business, he is, but he knew his stuff in one industry and then started branching off into other industries, including social influencing. So we'll go to a couple more examples before we start to wrap up and talk about, again, your individual branding. So I'm going to take a guess that maybe one person doesn't know who this person is. Just a guess, but is everybody here familiar with Okay, so everybody is familiar with Serena Williams and the tennis industry that she's in. So you may not necessarily think leadership, but you can definitely think branding with her. With athletes, and I know you mentioned volleyball, for example, with athletes nowadays, having a social media platform is like integral to their career, not just their career on and off the field or a tennis court or a basketball court, but in the long run. You have people that are retired that are now jumping on social media, that are now going on, for example, ESPN and so on and so forth, and they're just talking. But they're making money from talking because, again, they have this expertise, they have these experiences that are highly valuable, and of course the endorsement. So this is another example, again, of branding, leadership, and using branding in your leadership. There we go. All right. And then these two. You may know one of them, but not necessarily both of them. But I see you're smiling, so you know who they are, right? Okay. So Bill and Melinda Gates, the handful of billionaires that exist that are philanthropists, these are definitely two people you want to familiarize yourself with more. So if you don't know Bill Gates' story, I'm going to briefly, in a minute or less, try to share that with you. So he and Steve Jobs born the same year, 1955, and they both happen to be outliers, if you will. If you don't know what I'm referring to, Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, is a great book to read. I wouldn't be a librarian if I didn't plug a book, at least in this particular workshop. But he was, again, a super, super outlier along with Steve Jobs when it came to the tech industry, an innovator to say the least, and he founded Microsoft Computers. So if you have never really heard the story about Microsoft and Bill Gates, or for that matter, you mentioned Apple Computers earlier, he is one of the two guys when it comes to the tech industry in general you definitely want to find more information about. I did have a picture of a COO of Google. For some reason, it is not showing up. Let me see if I can at least share. I feel really bad if I didn't show my Latina example, because she is awesome at what she does. Let's see. Downloads. Okay, there we go. I am. I'm on Instagram Live, so I can be seen, but y'all are not. All right, so can everybody see this picture? I'll try to zoom in a bit. There we go. So this is a chief operating officer for Google's consumer hardware, Ana Corrales, and she is one of the most powerful Latina entrepreneurs in the world. And again, I mentioned why. Google, she's running literally the operations for Google. And if you've never, again, heard about the Google story, definitely a cool story to learn about. They have their connections to the University of Maryland. But again, when it comes to exposure, when it comes to influence, these are things that in her story as well, one step at a time, one day at a time, as Will Smith would say, laying down one brick perfectly each day. She did that to get to the position that she's in as COO of a global corporation. So having said that, I'm going to go back to this other slide because I know we're about to wrap up in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So let me go back one. That was not supposed to be there. See if I can hit that arrow from this angle. No, I cannot. All right. That's why I have this wireless mouse. So I was going to, again, talk with you all, work with you all when it came to your own individual branding, because some of you are in different places in your time here at USG. And I think it's super important while I'm here with you that I kind of talk things out and talk things through with you. So does anybody want to jump and be the example of how we'll do this portion of branding and figuring that out? All right, so Jennifer, you told me, did I say it right? Okay. You told me mentorship, social media, influencing in particular, communications, and there's one more thing I'm forgetting. Public speaking. So with that, when you graduate from here, what is something that you're looking forward to doing? Is there a company you want to start working for?
Right now I'm actually looking at a graduate internship. It's with this nonpartisan company. Basically, it's starting out writing speeches for the president.
Okay.
And then managing his social media and making up fact sheets. So really my end game is I do hope to be a certified public speaker and even more than that, kind of having my own public speaking thing. So I feel right now I'm just trying to build the necessary skills so that I'll be prepared when I get there.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And when it comes to building those skills, I'm just going to touch on this particular note. Are Are you already involved with an organization that works on that, public presentations, public speaking, or speaking in general?
I'm in Toastmasters. I told them I'm kind of taking a break right now, finishing my last semester. But I started that process, yeah.
Awesome. So Toastmasters, and for those of you that are not familiar with Toastmasters, really amazing organization. If you just go on YouTube and type in, was it Toastmasters competition? Just listen to the competitions from the past 5 years alone. They're really great. So you have that going on. When it comes to mentorship and being a mentee, I'm going to include that as well. What can you say a little bit about yourself and your experiences recently and what you're looking forward to doing?
So in terms of mentorship, I'm really highly involved in my church. So I kind of grew up in the church, and then now that I'm older, I have kids who were younger than me that they're all my age group is kind of anywhere from I want to say 14 to 18 years old. So I just kind of work a lot with them. My church is also in DC, so we go with very different backgrounds and experiences. Right. So I turned from somebody who we grew up kind of more as friends, and then now that I'm older, I kind of mentor a lot of these people. I've started other women's groups at my church as well. I recently started another one. So I feel like that's my mentorship side. It's just working with people who are younger than me, and kind of just sharing my experience in life and helping them to guide theirs as well.
Cool. Now I know it didn't include this young lady on the screen, but Priscilla Schreier, does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you were saying that, I'm that's a perfect example of not necessarily what you specifically should aspire toward, but a great example of branding. And that whole Evans family is amazing. I met actually her dad.
I met him too.
Oh, you did?
He came to one of our conferences.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
That's cool.
really nice.
That's awesome. So, obviously I have a bunch of symbols up here. I know you know one of those symbols very well. So when it comes to digitally speaking, building your brand, what have you done, for example, when it comes to any of these platforms at the bottom left corner, or platforms in general? Because of course I didn't include Snap. I didn't include TikTok. There we go. There's a bunch of them out there these days. But is there anything that you can say, on Twitter I post these tweets regarding events I'm serving at, or on Instagram I do now live posting, etc.
So I'm still trying to develop my brand. I think the biggest thing is I know I want to do public speaking, but I kind of somebody told me you have to discover your niche first, and I don't necessarily feel like I have necessarily a niche. It's more personal advice or things that I've gone through. So I have a public speaking page, but literally I've never posted to it. It's kind of been sitting there for a year now because I don't know what kind of content to create to brand myself.
Gotcha. So, and this is again a community conversation, even though we're obviously talking. If anybody wants to jump in, if there's any ideas that pop into mind.
What's the niche?
So basically, your target audience, what they were talking about in the last room, you can market to the world, but everybody's not gonna, buy what you're selling. So it's really figuring out, are you the makeup industry? Do you want to do business? Do you want to do finance? What's your target audience? Your group of people where you fit in. So I'm trying to figure out, everybody's a speaker, but what are you gonna speak about? So I'm trying to figure out what is my target audience? What's my group?
Right.
But to start figuring out your niche, you have to start going out and doing the stuff. For example, the page you have, you should start the same thing. For example, what you do with your church and the mentoring groups, the same thing you got there, you can post it on the webpage, or you can go more in depth there, and then people can start knowing about you, and you can see what you want to focus on. Because of course now you're in a place where you're oh well, what should I do now? What should I talk about? What interests me more? But if you don't start doing it often and letting people know what you can talk about, then you're never gonna find out. So that's a way where you could start, and you could start using that page and post it in on Instagram, or you can put something a small phrase that you put that you wrote in the page, and then put it on Instagram, put a picture, or Twitter also. That works a lot.
It's trial and error.
That's all right.
How did you, and I know, I'm sorry your name?
Christina,
how did, I know in the previous workshop you talked about how you do live streams of your, and then you put it on Twitch and then Twitter and stuff like that. How did you start that platform out? Would that be similar in a sense where it's
the things that I do is I try to bring the people and see what people are appeal to my content. So for example, I do silly things on stream. I yell or start cussing at the computer or at another player, and some people are attracted to it. So, for example, I started like trying out putting different type of videos or different type of content or different type of like funny things to see what appeal more to people, and I narrowed it down to like, okay, people like when I cuss at other players online, which is not that good, but I mean that's what my content was about. So that's what I started to do basically, like just as she said, trial and error basically.
Yeah, because the internship that I'm working at, 2 years ago they just started having like a social media account.
Oh, wow.
Because their target audience is like HVAC, like older, more predominant male generation, so it's like the older crowd, and like obviously they don't use like Facebook, Instagram, and all that. Like so far we only have LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, but it's like I'm helping them out with that, like posting stuff, like see what they like, posting videos, and like trial and error type thing. And like recently I did a blog post on my experience like through the eyes of an intern. So it's like we got a lot of views and like likes and shares from that. So I'm doing another one for them for another community service thing that I did for them. So it's like a trial and error type of thing.
All awesome input for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I know we're a little bit short on time. It's about we have like maybe 10 minutes tops. Excuse me. So I want to touch briefly on, again, social media, but I do want to talk about, again, some of these icons and why they're out there. So even though we like glanced at it, and I mean glanced at it, Damon John, for example, if you were to go back after this workshop and check out all his profiles, whether it be LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, he kind of has the same information, like a blurb of some sort that he starts out with, which is essentially a personal mission statement, a personal statement on what their vision is or what they're about. So one thing about your brand, and again, this is something that's evolving. It's not like a set in stone thing. When Venus and Serena Williams were like 11 and 14 respectively, they weren't like thinking, yeah, I'm going to get all these endorsements 10 years from now when I'm in my 20s and I'm going to be traveling the world, winning championships, maybe getting second place here and there, but winning a lot of my championships. That wasn't what their initial like vision was as kids. As kids, they were like, we love tennis because our dad taught us tennis and we enjoy spending time with our father. And that passion developed into what they now do globally with their particular brand. So whether it's for yourself, Sir Sam, volleyball, and I honestly don't know too much about the volleyball industry outside of collegiate volleyball. And I have some friends that have played for the University of Maryland, for example, back in the day. I don't know too much about that, but I do know that there are many, for example, women in the volleyball industry that have used that as a platform to invest in young girls, mentoring girls, whether it be coaching or camps and such like that, things such as that. So that may be something you want to think about, like beyond a sport, for example, because our bodies are frail and they're not going to be what they are right now forever. What do I want to do moving forward that's I'm still passionate about? Because for you, for example, from what you shared, Jennifer, like you're very passionate when it comes to your congregation, when it comes to the youth that are in your congregation, in your community, and of course, overall, like empowering people, uplifting people, I would assume safely from what you shared, right? And then for you as well, and again, from one geek to another, I already know that technology means a lot more than just entertainment. Like it's a way that you touch people's lives, touch people's souls, and connect with people that in some cases wouldn't be able to normally speak up or speak out or get out and like be able to connect with people on a normal basis. So for just regarding the industries that you all shared with me just now, regarding the majors that you all shared as well, there's a common thread which when it comes to branding, when it comes to even branding on social media, there's a connectivity to others. Like people are always looking for an opportunity to connect with people. They may not say that out loud or very vulnerably, but that's the absolute truth. So when it comes to your brand, whether it's music, for example, or guitar playing, I have friends who play professionally in the DC area. Whether it comes to that or any other, again, passion or industry that you're in, how can I use this thing that I'm passionate about to connect with other people and not just connect, help them out? That's like the really big question you want to ask yourself when it comes to branding yourself and leadership. I'll give you my story, and I think this might help a little bit. So I've always loved education. I grew up in 2 countries, in the United States and Nigeria. I come from a line of educators, doctors, miners, etc. But I've always loved to learn, and I love games too. So one of the things that I remember growing up doing was not just playing games, but also thinking about the mechanics, like how does this game work? Whether it was this is dating myself now, Tiger Electronics game where it was handheld and 2-bit, or a Game Boy, et cetera, et cetera. But my love for technology connected me to people. My love for education has always connected me to people. My love for art as well has always connected me to people. And I didn't choose to be an art teacher. I was exposed to art teachers who saw that talent in me from a very young age and were encouraging me to enter into a school, University of Maryland in this case, and be an art major, and then be an art education master's degree major. So I did that because of the exposure I had there. I got into schools, I started working with young people, and I also started working with older people who are educators or administrators, and I started to see the politics and policy that can be in education. So that exposed me to, hey, I have more power or influence, if you will, if I were to get this degree. When I went to Texas, as I said earlier, I was in direct selling, but I also went back to teaching, and I started teaching video game design and computer animation when I was down there for a little bit at the high school level. I've also coached soccer here in the Montgomery County area. But when I was in Texas, that's when I enrolled into a second master's program in educational leadership and admin, and that's what also further exposed me to other opportunities that brought me back to the DMV from the DFW area. I was in Dallas-Fort Worth, and now I'm in higher ed, where for the first time in my life I'm a librarian, but I'm again being exposed to these different opportunities where I can have influence and still impact people in education, in the arts, in technology, and in other fields that relate to government politics as it relates to education policy. So I didn't necessarily have a vision as a young boy in Nigeria that I'd be where I am right now, but I certainly knew what my passions were, and I just happened to be in front of the right people in different times in my life. So you want to start thinking about as well when it comes to your brand, who are the people right now that you're around that can give you those opportunities that are not necessarily already there for you, but maybe there in the future. Who are you, for that matter, when it comes to giving exposure to other people, when it comes to giving them opportunities? Because that's the thing. As you're climbing the ladder of whatever you decide to do, you also want to be bringing people up with you. You don't want it to just be you at the top and everybody below. That's not what your leadership should be about, because at the end of the day, like I said, serving people. That's what leadership is, ultimately. You're serving other people through what you do, through, as some would say, how you cultivate the land, or how you plow the fields, or how you make and program games, or how you play music. And I could harp on music, pun intended, for a little bit, but you and I both know, and everybody honestly here knows, there are so many musicians through their music that have much more influence now than they did when they started their career or started just singing at a choir. Beyonce and Whitney Houston, I'll use those two for example. Justin Bieber, probably one of the more prime examples and recent examples of influence with social media and branding in mind. Music, I mean, every industry that you all shared, there's somebody that is a great example of branding. There's somebody that is a great example of a servant leader that you definitely want to take notes or follow copiously, if you will. So with that being said, I think we have like 3 minutes. So I know this has already been shown, the Q&A part. Were there any questions in general about, for example, I didn't touch on Adobe Creative Cloud, Nikon, Canon, but these are different, whether it be hardware, software, companies that exist that you can utilize here at USG to help with your branding online specifically and offline as well. But were there any questions people had, or is there a lot of marinating of thought going on?
I guess my question is, how important is it to be adept to social media and like digital media in today? Like, how is it fine? Because me personally, and I actually had this conversation with Jennifer. I don't have an Instagram or like Twitter or any of that. Primarily for the reasons like I see people in my age group, the like almost like addiction to it,
yeah.
And then also like not being able to be authentic because they're trying to live certain lives through their platforms, and that's not the person who I am. So I like meaningful connections, face-to-face connections. I feel like I can relate to people more. But as I'm being like in school here, the world is shifting digitally, and I feel like if I don't get with the times, I'll get too late, or I wouldn't be able to, like you said, put myself in a position of exposure in order to create an opportunity for myself if I'm not utilizing these social media, digital media, Adobe, and stuff like that. Right. So how important is it, and I guess how do I start getting in there? Like, how do I creep into it?
Mm-hmm. So great question, and I want to emphasize this part. So I used, the first time I ever used an Adobe product, I was in 7th grade, which is like early 90s, like early 90s, and I used Adobe Illustrator. And at the time, what I understood about Illustrator was that it's just a tool. 20 plus years later, it's the same thing. It's just a tool. So yes, it's important to use these devices, these software applications, etc. But you want to, and you said it yourself, like it's not something you want to be obsessed with, right? Imagine if you were walking around with a hammer, you're just like, man, this hammer is so awesome. I can pick nails and smash them, and oh my god, you know, that's what people do essentially with their phones, but they don't see it that way. So as long as you understand what it is that you have in your hand in the form of a mobile device, a tablet, or a laptop or desktop computer, it's just a tool. It's a means to an end. You'll be good. You'll be disciplining yourself. You'll be moderating yourself, and you'll use it when you need to. Because again, that's what a tool is for. Like I have this wireless mouse connected to this computer, so I don't have to be behind this podium. I hate being behind podiums. Like if you ever ask any former student of mine that you ever run into, if you do, they will tell you I'm the type of person that like to actually walk and talk and like that's me. I will fall asleep literally at a desk if I'm here the whole time. So, but that tool exists for a reason. This tool, this monitor, this projector, all these tools exist for a reason. It's, again, a means to an end. So understanding what your end is still, or end game since a certain, cinematic film came out recently, having that in mind as you're considering maybe I should use Instagram for the first time instead of an account. That's always a good thing to do. But just remember, at the end of the day, it's a tool that is used for very specific reasons, and you define how, when, and where those reasons apply to you in your life when it comes to branding yourself. Does that make sense? Okay. And you have a great question.
For the Adobe, like how do you get into stuff like that? How do you learn?
Right. So, and I wish honestly I could geek out about Adobe, so I'm just going to go back. So, and this is a shameless plug. So, if you want to learn a little bit more about the general Creative Cloud suite, we have workshops at Pretty Library that you can go to. They're previously scheduled, but if you have like a one-on-one session that you want to set up because your work schedule, your life schedule doesn't allow you to come to the ones that are already previously planned, you can definitely contact me directly, or you can go to the library website and actually request on-demand workshops. So we teach workshops mainly on Photoshop and Illustrator, but and I'm the person who instructs those, but when it comes to Creative Cloud, I can walk you through the general workflow of all the programs that we have. And we literally, if you go to the second floor below us in OIT or downstairs on the first floor at Pretty Library, we have at least 2018 edition of Creative Cloud. But again, there are a lot of really neat programs like Adobe's programs that exist. But I intentionally also put this one up here for a reason. Is anybody familiar with GIMP?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what it is. And I'm happy at least one person does. So Adobe Creative Cloud is not freeware. They do have trialware. You can use it for 30 days, but at some point they want you to cough up the dough. But there are a lot of great freeware items out there, or free programs, in other words, that exist that literally, and this is the neat thing about technology these days, it can literally do the exact same thing that Photoshop, Illustrator, and all these other major programs like 3D Max by Autodesk, Maya as well can do. So even though I only have these limiting, so to speak, icons up here, another freeware program you might want to download, and this is again to help you with your workflow. There's VLC player, video player. There's Irfan View, IRFAN View. That's a more so picture image. Looks like my time's up. Okay. Irfan View is another one. I know I'm forgetting one. Blender. Blenders are really great if you're into animation, 3D animation, not just like people moving around like Shrek, but if you want to do logos in 3D and use that for videos that you want to produce in the future. That's something that is actually free to you, and you can easily go on YouTube, take online classes through YouTube, and learn how to make your own 3D logo. Let's say, for example, you wanted to have a logo that has your name with a volleyball instead of that letter A in your name. You can make that using Blender for free, and then you can transfer that 3D file, vector image, if you will, into another video program. And there are a bunch of video programs as well as audio programs, thinking about music in mind, that you can get for free. So there are a lot of tools out there, like I said earlier. These are just some of them. Your mobile, a lot of you, I think everybody here in the room has a mobile phone, correct? I'd be surprised because it's 2019. So what you have, whether it's a Windows phone, an iPhone, or any other type of phone, a Galaxy phone, I used to have a Note 3 back in the day, there are actual default tools, including the camera itself, that you can record video on, that you can use to launch your brand if you ever decide to launch something on Instagram or launch something on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, by the way, I don't want to beat the drum because I'm understanding LinkedIn is like a bad word here on campus, but LinkedIn is actually starting to get hip to what Instagram and Snapchat have been doing recently by having live video streaming. So they're trying to compete, in other words. But because it's the type of platform that it is on a professional basis, you're actually going to be able to garner, just like you were saying earlier, a particular crowd of people that you normally would not be able to attract, if you will, on other platforms. And I know I didn't include Twitch. Twitch is a great one. If you've never heard of a guy named Ninja and Twitch, look him up. You'll be surprised about his story.
What they changed now.
Yeah, he's getting more money from Microsoft now. But, those are great tools to use that most people already have, their phones. I mentioned Canon and Nikon. I'm a Canon person, but here on campus there are Nikon cameras, which aren't bad. I actually have one right here. But you have tools here on campus that, because you pay your tuition, because you are here on campus, are essentially free to you. I don't say that quite literally, because again, you do pay for these things, but they are available at your service. And then when you're off campus, there are actual tools you can download. There are tools that you may already have, or you can borrow and loan from other libraries that are affiliated with the university or affiliated in general with the county that you're in, that you can also use to build your brand. But I have to stop because I got not the evil eye from Shelby, but she gave me that look. So if you had not already grabbed one of these, this is contact information for all my colleagues at the library. Feel free to grab one if you didn't get one. If you want to take any additional notes, I have this, like I said, on Instagram, so I'm going to try to upload it as soon as possible, and you can watch it again, and I'll try to share that with Shelby. And if you just came in, I'm glad people came in nonetheless. Glad to have you. I know life happens, and you have work and families to take care of, but feel free to grab any of these on your way out. But thank you so much for your time. My card is here as well. If you want to directly contact me, know that that's me.
Thank you.
And then this was for note-taking, but like I said, I'll have the video on later on. And if you want to take more than one, that's totally fine. But y'all, thank you so much for your time. And have a great rest of your day. If it's not a great day, choose to make it a great one.